Starting up now. All right, let's get started. Hello and welcome to another Incosi Canada chapter webinar. Our topic today is Patient First AI-Assisted Risk Engineering for Medical Wearables. I'll first provide a little background and then introduce our speakers. The goal of risk management in medical device development has always been patient safety, but identifying every relevant risk without gaps and without bias is a difficult task. This risk identification step shapes everything that follows, so it's important that we get it right. Today's speakers, Neha Sam and Jonas Müller, will walk through how AI can help surface risks earlier and more completely, reducing the blind spots that come from human familiarity with the design. That said, AI is only the starting point. Clinical context, trade-off decisions, and judgment calls that determine whether a device is truly safe will require human expertise. This presentation takes an honest look at where AI adds real value in risk management and where it cannot replace the engineers who ultimately own the patient's safety. Neha Sam holds both a bachelor's and a master's degree in biomedical engineering. She built her foundation as a systems engineer at Molly Surgical, now part of Stryker, and Boston Scientific, where she led requirements, testing, and risk management for next generation capital equipment. Her experience bridges deep technical expertise with commercial impact, helping customers understand and adopt complex technology. Neha is now with Matrix One, where she brings her product and systems background to the commercial side, helping medical device teams realize how technology can work for them across the full product lifecycle. Jonas Müller is the head of enterprise solutions at Matrix One, where he partners with enterprise customers across medical devices, pharma, and biotech as their strategic technical advisor. With a background in medical computer science and certification as a first and second party auditor for medical devices, Jonas brings deep regulatory and technical expertise to the forefront, spanning risk analysis, complex solution design, and quality management to every customer engagement. Jonas began his career at Matrix One as a support engineer before progressing to the role of senior solution consultant, building hands-on experience with the technical challenges life sciences organizations face daily. Jonas is passionate about helping manufacturers bring safer, more effective products to patients through smarter and more efficient software solutions. I'd like to note that there will be a Q&A session after the main presentation, and also please note that this session is being recorded. I now wish to welcome Neha and Jonas for today's presentation. Please feel free to take over the screen. I will mute now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ivan. Appreciate the intros. If you could help us out with one more thing, I don't think we're able to share on our end because we're not presenters or meeting organizers. If you mind enabling access.
Okay, let me do that.
Sure.
Bear with me for 1 second.
I think, Jonas, you should be able to do that.
Yeah, Jonas, you should be able to. Okay, it's going to take me just a moment. Okay, it should work momentarily. Just saving changes to the options here. Okay, you should have.
Yeah, I made her a presenter indeed. I was the presenter.
Yep, okay.
But I'm good on my end now, so I can. Well, okay, wait. There's some security questions. All right, yes. Quit and reopen. All right. I'm gonna have to jump out and jump back in really quickly. Give me a quick minute.
What would a presentation be without technical difficulties?
Exactly. I mean, that's what we talked about in the beginning, right? That there's always technical difficulties for users not used to Teams all the time. So that's probably a software update where you need to reassign permissions or something. So
yeah, so often the case. Yeah, I'm just double checking meeting options. Yeah, it should be once Neha logs back in, everything should be fine.
I'm so sorry. I
There we
cannot
go. No
can't
worries.
share on my end. Oh wait, never
Still
mind.
can't.
Can't.
Yeah,
I
you
can.
can. You can. Just took a minute.
Okay, here we go. All right, very good.
Cool.
Thank you.
No worries. All right. Thanks, everyone. A couple of speed bumps. Everyone can see my screen. Yes, double checking. Good. Awesome. All right, let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining today. I know this is outside of the usual time of 8 p.m., so I know some people might be in between work days right now, so appreciate taking some time to join us for this technical webinar. Again, Ivan did a really nice intro for both of us. Again, we're both from Matrix One, and really in the next 30 minutes, what we want to do is walk through what risk management specifically in medical device looks like. I know there's some people here with different backgrounds, transit, outside defense, outside of medical devices. So hopefully this gives you a little peek about what risk management specifically in medtech looks like, and more specifically, what happens when you put AI anywhere near it. Again, so quick just overview of the agenda. I'll start off with the quick case study that we're reviewing today. Then I'll pass it off to Jonas for a review of the MedTech principles for risk management, as well as some of the blind spots that commonly appear during risk analysis. I'll switch over to show you how AI really can benefit and the impact it can have when you're doing that risk management process. But then, of course, that there is never a over-reliance on AI. So we're going to kind of leave some imparting questions about how you can create an AI policy that can stand the test of time. And then, we'll go from there. And then again, questions at the end. But if you do have anything that comes top of mind, feel free to drop it in the chat so we can go back to it at the end of the presentation. All right. Off to you, Jonas.
Are you sure? Isn't the case study?
Never mind. Let me start back with the case study. So again, I think this was a previous InCozy presentation that Ivan had presented a while back. I believe it's back last year.
Yeah, it was Ivan Taylor. So there's two Ivans on the InCozy Canada chapter board. But yes, Ivan Taylor had a previous paper. Yes.
Yeah, so and it was really interesting, and we wanted to use that as kind of a baseline for this specific case study where we talk about risk management. But the idea was to kind of talk about the requirements framework that's required for this is a class 2 wearable for diabetes lifestyle support. So we really talked about, he really, kind of laid down the foundation of what is the requirement framework, what are the requirements for the product itself. Again, it was multi-layered. There was an actual insulin pump that worked over Bluetooth energy. We had, I believe it was the actual continuous glucose monitoring. There was activity tracking as well. Some dietary logging, as well as a coaching layer that sits on top of all of this and tells the person some actionable insights on what to do. Again, I'm not going to go through over that entire presentation in full detail, but I'll just point out some key numbers that really matter here. So the first one being 10 seconds. This is the window that's required to warn somebody that their glucose is heading somewhere dangerous. The framework had about 9 logical models. So this is sensors, processing, interface, comms, etc. 5 external interfaces. So the actual companion app, the cloud, the clinician portal, the charger, and then of course the actual insulin pump that's working over Bluetooth energy. So again, we're not just describing a lifestyle support, such as coaching, activity, what diet. This is actually sits one step from being able to actually administer the insulin as well. And so that resulted in really 24 requirements, high level, 12 functional and 12 non-functional, and this was all before any decomposition. So kind of hold on to that as the kind of the basis of this presentation, and we'll kind of walk you through how risk management looks like for this specific use case. And now it's off to you, Jonas.
And now it's off to me. Perfect. So indeed, we can start with the next slide already. So It is. I will now talk you through risk management a little bit in medical devices, and that we all, no matter in what industry we are, we have the same word for risk management, but it's a different word. So to go to the next slide, you will see a couple of standards here, and I will be honest about it. All the aerospace, automotive, or rail standards, I will not explain to you because you are probably far more knowledgeable about them than I am, but I want to pull out one structural differences compared to all these standards, compared to medical device and ISO 14971, because each of your worlds and also our world has a scheme for classifying how much rigor a function demands. So, for example, DAL, ASIL, SIL, something like that. We have that as well, but ISO 14971 adds another layer and something explicit on top. It's the so-called benefit risk analysis, that is clause 7.4. And that means a risk can be judged acceptable if the clinical benefit actually outweighs it. And this benefit is actually going back to the same person that is carrying the risk. So what does that mean? That means that a patient actually accepts the risks of a device, of a procedure or something like that, because it's supposed to make them healthier. So in medical devices, we are not only asking how to prevent failure, but we are also asking if a residual risk is justified by what the patient gains out of it. So, and that should be the whole lens for the rest of this session. So next slide, please. In ISO 14971, we will always ask for 5 things. We will identify hazards, we will analyze the risk, we decide if it's acceptable, we will control when it's not, and we will then evaluate what's left over as a residual risk before we ship the product. And then post-market surveillance feeds straight back into the hazard identification. So this whole loop actually never closes. So nearly every company has this on paper. And that is not bad. It's just the execution is where it gets messy. And this is what the rest of the section is about. And it actually also runs to another way too, that a risk control measure, so a new component, a new part of the product, is actually not the end of the risk conversation, because it's actually a new design input. And that means that if you've changed the device, this change needs its own testing, it needs its verification, and it can actually also introduce new hazards and new risks. So to go to the next slide, in general, in 14971, this is something that actually surprises a lot of people outside of medical devices, that 14971 is principle-based. That means it tells you what to do, but so identify, evaluate, and control, but it's not exactly how to do it or at which scale. So if we see on the slides, 2 companies can have totally different scorings, like a different severity scale. They can score serious harm differently, and they can still be fully compliant. And this is actually not a flaw of the standard, but this flexibility is actually very important, because a medical device can be everything from a tongue depressor to an implanted defibrillator. So all different risk classes, different complexity of devices, and that only means that the risk maturity inside their processes, that these vary a lot from company to company. And this is actually what matters for what is coming on the next slides, because I want to talk a little bit about the different tools that we have, or that you also know for sure. Because most of the programs start with a PHA, so preliminary hazard analysis. And you all know this is not coming from medical devices, it's actually coming from the US Defense System Standard. And therefore, some of you probably know it. And this is actually at the concept stage. And I want to talk on this slide about the blind spots of all these methods. So because the hazard analysis is at the concept stage and is happening before the design is actually locked, a cross-functional group will brainstorm hazards in one room from different teams. So the hazard software use teams, environment teams, they will all sit in one room and do a hazard analysis. So What does that mean? This means that it's actually only as good as the imagination of whoever is in this room. So two different groups can actually come together to totally different risks in the same device. And the next one is the FMEA. So this one is bottom up. That means it will be component by component. It's super strong on the identification level. It's super strong on coverage for risks and failures, but it's kind of weak on interaction between different components since we classify failure modes there. We have then also the fault tree that is top down then. So that is from a very complex unwanted event. So this can be super strong on the whole system and system thinking, but again, it's only as good as the event you define and the event you thought to define. And then we have, last but not least, the 5 whys. That is more of a retrospective method where you analyze the root cause after something is already going wrong, or you get a kappa or something like that. And then we have one more thing that is we find on the next slide, and that is the use error. And the use error is actually not inside the 49771, but lives in its own standard, the 6236661, the usability engineering. And that is actually where the other methods that we just spoke about are missing something or forgetting something. Because all this of the stuff that I described before is looking only for ways how the device can fail. But a patient can actually be harmed while every single component of your device performs exactly like you wanted it. This is a use error then. And this is running totally parallel to ISO 49701. It's not a subsection of your risk file, it's a separate process. And it also feeds back into 49701 and into the hazard analysis, for example, because you define the correct use and the errors a reasonable person can make. So, for example, if the interface can be misread, that's a design finding, not a user's fault. But what can happen is that some of you maybe design devices for trained users, certified users. Obviously, automotive, for example, is not doing that. And so are we in most cases, because we are designing devices for patients. So, for example, in our example, the glucose variable, it could happen that the patient is already hypoglycemic while reading the screen. So it means he is cognitively impaired at exactly the moment where he should read the instructions and everything. Or it could be at 3 in the morning, or in the middle of the sun or sunlight, or without their glasses, and so on and so on. Nobody trained them on the device. And that's actually the part that is often missing and is often flawed in the risk analysis, because people who design the interface and the product, they understand the product fully and they cannot unknow how it works. So, which makes them actually the worst available judges of whether a patient can misread it. And then we can go actually to the next slide, because in practice, all of this lives in spreadsheets. It lives in Excel risk registers, in mitigations will be tracked in Jira or DevOps, in Word documents, on a shared drive, and so on. Some may have an EQMS risk module or something like that, but often the risk file is still separated from the design history file, and the actual engineering work to keep that in sync is mostly manual. And if we look at the diagram, this is an example of a device. So every bubble on the right there is a cluster of some risk lines, basically plotted by severity and probability. And the number is obviously imaginary, but we thought a little bit about the device, and it could be that there will be 326 open line items and for one device and on one release. So before mitigation, actually. And this is not an unusual number. If I compare all the customers I see every day, this 326 risks is basically a normal workday to mitigate these risks. And I want to be really careful or really honest. Again, the point is not that everyone is doing a bad job or this is bad work or anything. All of these lines that were written are written by someone competent, and they are flagging correct risks. The point is actually much narrower, because 326 risks is a volume that no person can assess and can hold in their head. So nobody in the room can actually look at this picture and at 326 risks at the same time and immediately knows what is missing from it. So, and one more thing then goes into that direction, sorry, because a risk control measure is again not the end of a conversation, because it's, as I said previously, a new design input. So if you've changed the device, it needs its own verification and it can introduce hazards on its own. So every mitigation you add will grow this picture even. And so even with all these tools and defined standards, why do risks still slip through? That's actually what the next slides are about. And that is the blind spot problem, because the real risk in all risk analysis is not the risk that you have in your file, but it's the risks that you didn't think of. So if we go to the next slides, we will start now with a couple of causes, what could cause a risk that you didn't think of. And the first one is actually that it's kind of messy without a tool, because we all know we walk into risk management files without a dedicated tool, and then we'll find a spreadsheet with multiple final versions in different versions somewhere saved in different Google Drives or in different drives, an FMEA line that is referencing a component that is actually not existing anymore or that was redesigned, a mitigation that references a test that is actually nobody can find it anymore. And this is not because people are not diligent or something like that. It actually happens just when the structure is relying entirely on manual discipline. And the next cause is actually the human error, because even if you would have a perfectly maintained file, you are still obviously relying on humans, on people to catch things. And people tend to get tired, or people are in a rush when it comes to a milestone, or they lose the thread across hundreds of risk lines. And it's not a competency problem, but it's just cognitive load. So that's the next thing. And the cause 3 is then also related to humans. That's bias, because that's one of the core problems actually of risk management, because the core of everything that we are building is that a team designs a device, and mostly this team that designs the device is also the team assessing the risk. And that actually creates predictable blind spots. Confirmation bias, for example. Engineers tend to look exactly hardest for the failure modes they already suspect that they are existing, and they look less hard for the ones that surprise them. And also, the first few risk assessments you do in the hazard analysis, for example, they actually set the acceptable bar for the rest of the project. So everything gets judged relatively to the first risks you will find. And none of these is somehow because the engineers are not doing the proper work. It's just how humans and human cognition actually works. And then we can go to the next slide, actually, because next one is silos. That's another step in the human organization, because on top of all the individual bias and stuff like that, we have organizational silos. And we all know that, for example, in a device like the wearable we talked about, or the example we are using, we have different teams working on different stuff. So the alerting requirement of 10 seconds is one team, and that battery target of 72 hours is another team. And that means that power management can do its job and can put the device into a sleep state, but alerting does its job and is specifying 10 seconds. But nobody actually is asking the question whether the hypoglycemia alert is actually firing when we are in deep sleep in the 72 hours. And this risk is in no FMEA of both teams. It's actually the gap in between them. And this is the interaction level risks that we talked about in the FMEA. And then last but not least, we have another cause, that is the personal layer. Because often what happens is that we trust more experienced engineers more than we would trust a junior engineer, maybe. So risk ratings will get negotiated, not just calculated. So a junior engineer flags something as high, and then it gets downgraded by a senior reviewer that is close to the milestone or the schedule to a medium level. And this is actually what the nice lady Diane Vaughan called normalization of deviance. So departure from a standard that, because nothing bad happens immediately, quietly becomes the new normal. And this disagreement, again, is not attacking anyone. It's really, disagreement is actually healthy. So because you will find new things as well. But the problem is when this disagreement is not captured anywhere. So we just do it without reconstructing why a call was made at some point. And then the last slide for me here is how this adds up, because you probably all know this model here. It's the Swiss cheese model, and that's the name actually for when all of these different causes line up. So if it's a patient safety staple as an aviation one, it's in every industry, because every layer of defense you have, all your tools, your people, your review process, your org structure, they have holes. And in 99% of the cases, they don't line up, and something will catch the risk before it reaches a patient. But a messy tool, a tired reviewer, an unnoticed bias, and a silo, they could line up to 5 holes just at once, and then a risk sails straight through undetected. And that's actually the case for what we want to talk about now. We want to build something into this process that doesn't get tired, that is not attached to having building the design, that is cannot quietly wave a risk through on a bad day. And that's actually where I want to hand over to Leah to talk a little bit about AI.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jonas. All right, so let me pick it up. So Jonas kind of handed me, I feel like, a wish list almost. He wants 3 things: something that doesn't get tired, something that isn't attached to the actual design, and also something that can't waive a risk when it's having a bad day. And it's really not I would say, a wish list. It's more of a specification. And that's something that you can really build into an AI machine, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. And the line here that really differentiates what a machine can do is that it's not that it's all of a sudden clever, but it's also indifferent. It reads the 1,000th risk line in your FMEA the same way that it reads the first one. It doesn't choose the architecture, so there's no assumption that it's quietly trying to protect when it's doing its risk analysis. And then this one, I mean, I feel like is also fair to say it's doing the same risk analysis it would do at 5 p.m. on a Friday, the same thing it would do on a 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. And so that bias, those kind of that what Jonas talked about, it is we're able to kind of forego that with a AI risk model, for example. And so I think it'd be interesting to kind of show how we've done that here at Matrix. So we use a AI risk tool we call Matrix Mind. And it's not just, I will say, kind of a chatbot. What it really does is we've trained it on ISO 14971. We want it to be able to help us find the blind spots. Where are requirements missing risk mitigation? Where are there holes between the subsystem level requirements to the system level requirements? How can I ensure that I've actually done and covered all the risks that maybe I didn't have a chance to formulate during my formalized risk reviews? Again, it's also able to sit a little bit as a neutral moderator. So if you're looking for a kind of a third party that's able to evaluate your risk file, evaluate your design files, and show you potential gaps and potential improvements that you could add in, we've built it specifically to act as this third party. And then I think the nice thing is it's also a QA RA co-pilot. We always say it's almost a QA assistant and RA assistant. In medical device, there is a lot of specific medical device background that typically maybe engineers don't have. So as they're building something, as they're building the system level requirement, that system level architecture, it's almost built in a way to kind of work alongside of you to help you understand, okay, if you're applying 13485 within your design, what are some design considerations? If there's a specific type of insulin pump you're looking to build, what are the regulatory requirements for that specific pump? And how do I integrate that within my design? So again, it sits alongside of you to help you as you're kind of moving through your design in different phases. I do think it's really nice just to see kind of what the input. I'm not going to spend too much time to go through how the like the specifics and what you can do, but I do want to just show you, I think, high level about what that output looks like and how you can take that output and build something off of it. So I actually am going to go back to that specific example that Jonas mentioned. So we had those two requirements. We said that the user needs to, there needs to be a hypo or hyperglycemic alert to reach the user within 10 seconds of detection. And then the second requirement that we asked was that the system needs to have 72 hours of battery endurance. So I said, okay, identify hazardous situations arising from the interaction between these two requirements. For each, give the hazard, the sequence of events, the hazardous situation, and the potential harm, and name the modules involved. And again, I think there might be some people in the room who, again, a lot of us are systems engineers. The silo work that's typically happens when you're kind of working on one side, the firmware piece, the hardware piece. We're actually asking the system, okay, take a look at what's happening on the hardware requirement side, the firmware requirement side, and do that analysis for me and give me a baseline to work off of. And so what we see here, again, the AI is giving you a suggestion of some potential hazard analysis that you can review. Let's just do one. For example, this one is the power saving duty cycling, which delays alert transmission. So the hazard here is that the wireless alert module enters low power sleep cycle to conserve battery. Sequence of events would be that the firmware activates its duty cycled radio sleep to extend battery life. Next step would be glucose event detected during a radio off window. Then you have an alert queued, but it's actually not transmitted until the next wake cycle. And then you have a latency that exceeds 10 seconds. Your hazardous situation here is pretty obvious. The user is in a hypo or hyperglycemic state and receives no timely notification. And then your harm. Severe hypoglycemia, so that's loss of consciousness, seizures, etc. Diabetic ketoacidosis, which can happen, as well as any patient like, again, we're talking mortality here. So this is a very serious harm. And again, something that I want to make sure I've mitigated for in my design. So let's take it one step further. Again, it's going to give you a ton of suggestions. You are the expert. You get to read through and say what makes the most sense. I asked the system, I asked Matrix Mind, can you offer a potential mitigation for the first risk scenario? And so here what it's doing is it's looking at the system, it's looking at your system, it's looking at your system architecture and asking you questions about how does the current alert signal path work? How can you work within the modules you already have and the design that you already have to ensure you can build some sort of pathway to forgo? And again, you kind of parse through this information, you read what makes most of sense to you, and then you bring that into your design and then design for it. I'm going to go back into this to kind of show you what that means in actual practice. So I know we can all agree here that it is a great starting point, but if you are going to use AI in your design, you need to govern it. And what exactly does that mean? I don't know how many people are familiar with this specific AI violation. This there's a warning letter that was sent by the FDA, and this happened just this year. This was the 2nd of April, I believe. So the FDA actually issued a warning letter to a contract manufacturer named Purelea. They're based in Michigan. They make homeopathic over-the-counter drug products. This is the first letter in US drug history to ever cite over-reliance on AI as an issue. And I'm going to just kind of talk about high level what happened here. So they used AI agents to actually create their specifications, their procedures, their master production, and control records. The documents then went straight into a regulated record, and nobody in the quality unit reviewed them. Red flags all around. But I'm going to be very precise about what happened and what the FDA did as a response. They didn't just create some new AI rule says, hey, you're not allowed to use that. They actually cited a quality control unit rule, which has been involved in the regulation for around 40 years. The violation is not that the AI was actually used, but it was that the AI output went into regulation, went into production without being reviewed. And a very interesting, I think, detail in all of this is when the investigators asked them why they didn't do the validation of that process output, their answer was that the AI itself hadn't flagged it, so they didn't do it. So again, red flags all around, but I think it's unfair to say that the FDA, for example, is specifically against AI usage. It's not. It's created control pathways for you to be able to actually update cleared AI models without having to do a full new submission. The concern really here is about the governance of AI and not the technology itself. Of course, I mean, this is not something new. This is, I mean, kind of almost expected. This happens in other industries as well. This is not a careless manufacturer thing. It's a automation bias. And so this might be a lot more familiar to some other people in the room, but I think the reference that everybody cites is Parasurman and Riley, 1997 in Human Factors. So that's aviation. The finding is pretty simple. You know, reliability makes you compliant. A tool that's wrong a lot gets checked. A tool that's right most of the time stops getting checked because it kind of earns that trust. This also has happened in law as well. There was a 2023 case where attorneys had used AI fabricated citations. They kind of believed that the system was able to come up with these references, and then they used it. So again, this is it's common across industries and not specific to medical device. Again, I think another really important point to make here is that we're not talking about AI in the actual device itself. We're actually talking about AI in your process. And so there's two very clear distinctions here. One being that AI inside the device, that's very clearly regulated from an FDA standpoint. There's the EU AI Act, Annex 1. It's high risk. It's automatically flagged. If you do have any AI-based decisions within your design, you have to go through the IEC 62304 revision, and a lot of that has been updated with the rise of AI. The FDA, again, I said, they've actually created a controlled pathway which lets you pre-authorize your model updates in your original submission. So again, that gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of regulation around it. But that's the second piece, the AI inside your design process, inside your risk process. That's a little different. There's no real clear regulation so far. Again, it falls back to your quality system that you're running. For our case, it's ISO 1345, which you use to validate your QMS. There's also Part 11, which you use for records and signatures. But in terms of your actual AI governance policy, a lot of that does actually fall on the manufacturer itself. So I'm going to kind of leave with some questions, I guess, for the team of how do you approach your AI governance policy in the best way? So there's 8 questions here, 4 for before you deploy, 4 for once it's running. Again, I think we might be a little short on time, so I'm not going to run through each one, but I will share these questions with everyone who attended after this meeting. But again, this is just a way of kind of asking you some questions about, you know, who is this going to be allowed? Where's the responsibility? When is a human actually going to be part of the loop? And making sure that the final product that's pushed out has the right review, has involved the right stakeholders, and you have a continual process to make sure that things are being done in a timely way. Again, risk never ends once you push that final product out. Risk is a continual process that happens, like Jonas said, once you get your post-market surveillance data and you have to reconsider the design, once you're making updates to the design itself. It's continually happening throughout the life cycle of the product. I will kind of also give a shout out to a lot of the engineers on the Matrix team that have worked tirelessly to ensure that the Matrix Mind AI tool has considered all of these. So a couple things that we do on our end, we have a zero data retention policy. We've designed it that way so we don't keep any of your data. We don't train our model on your data. We don't train other people's or use it on other customers' data as well. It's all of the infrastructure is not on a third party, it rests with us. We also really, and I think a key thing is here, is that we ensure that we show very transparently the reasoning behind what's happening within the model. So with every prompt, and every step of the way, we are transparent of how we kind of ended up with that decision. What is it pulling in the background? What is it looking at? What is it considering in order for you to get your final deliverable? And of course, nothing is actually accepted until someone goes in and signs off on it. Last, I would say the formal verification and validation process that typically happens at QMS, that happens also within the AI, within our AI tools as well. And I think the really the best part is that we've engineered it against hallucination. So we've said, if you don't know, please state that you don't know, so that we are actually giving clear answers when you're using the tool. And so again, this is just a framework that we've worked with in order to ensure that we're building something that makes sense. This is a little different from, what happened with Purelea in terms of there was a process output that was almost immediately pushed out to production. What we're trying to do here is kind of create a closed system loop where a human actually accepts every single change, reviews those changes, and there's a way to have a formalized review within the process to make sure whatever output happens during that design phase, during the risk phase, is being properly reviewed and outputted in a way that makes sense for the team, as well as for the product. Yeah, I think I'll just end off my section with this. At the end of the day, AI gives you coverage, but it doesn't give you judgment. You are the expert of your product, and that continues to be the case across industries as well. So, Jonas, I'll pass this back to you to kind of end us off.
Sounds good, because indeed we want to come to a conclusion in the end. And what is very important is that AI is in everyone's mind and everyone's mouth, but people actually tend to forget also the dangerous part about AI, and that's the conclusion that I want to make now here. So if we go to the next slide, we will see actually when we come back to the Swiss cheese model again, because it's actually very honest about what we described today. Every layer of defense has holes. So what Neha showed you, the whole AI layer, it is not by far not a layer without holes. There's no such thing. Every layer has holes, and it's just in different places from yours. So that's the whole value of the AI. It is not tired, but it still is something dangerous or something with holes, because a machine doesn't have a clinical context. It doesn't have the accountability, so you will be the person that is signing it. And it's also not always as confident, or it is mostly exactly as confident when it knows something or if it doesn't know something. So it will just sound very confident in both ways. So it is not the safety net under your full process. That's not what we wanted to tell you, but it's another layer, another net in the Swiss cheese diagram that has holes at different places, that gives you more security and has a different shape. So, but in the end, you are still the one holding this safety net. So the one decision, if we go to the next slide, that we cannot cannot delegate is actually the clause 7.4, again, the benefit risk, because AI you cannot delegate that to AI. A tool that can enumerate hazards that were never listed, that proposes mitigation, cross-checks our register, against our requirements and shows where each suggestions come from. All of that is super nice, but it cannot decide if the particular residual risk is justified by a particular gain that a patient gets. And that is not a capability gap that you will close with a better model. That's a question of standing, actually. The machine isn't accountable for that decision and never will be accountable for a decision like that. So that is exactly what also the Polea case is showing, that the tool's silence got actually treated as an answer. And that's not true, because what you should take, well, if you take one line from today, I would recommend that the tool will widen the net, but the signature in the end will stay yours. And one last thing, and then I will really stop for today, is that we spent now half an hour on standards, method, bias, governance, and tooling, and it's easy for a risk register to become a document that you maintain for an auditor like me. But it is worth saying plainly what every line on this is actually. It is a person wearing the thing you built, or it's a person using the thing you built. It is possibly hypoglycemic. It's possibly at 3 in the morning. It is without the glasses on, as we said. So exactly the use error. And this is, to me, always the only scoreboard that actually matters in ISO 14971, EFMEA, fault-free, and using AI. All of this is an instrumentation pointed at the one question that this whole presentation was about, that it's patient first, and the title, this is the title of the talk, and it's the whole argument why you should use all these different methods and use the best thing possible. And then, of course, like Neha, I have some homework for you if you want. So on the next slide, we can send it to you. I would love if you actually act on these and just do something like a hazard analysis with somebody who didn't build your device or your product, just to see how the bias problem is there, or to pick a requirement or two requirements that are owned by different teams and see who verifies the interaction or if someone did it, and these other two things as well. So last but not least, I think we can only thank you for listening, and yeah, we are happy to answer any question you might have now or also in the future.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Neha. Thank you, Jonas. This was a really good presentation. Makes you think, how you can use AI. I have just a question in terms of just the logistics of how you go through. So if I'm understanding this right, you would use AI to determine some of your safety use cases and then safety goals, ultimately resulting in safety requirements. Is that, would you use AI at each of these steps?
You want to take that one, Jonas? I think
Yeah, I can pick that one. So indeed, where I would use AI personally is indeed, for example, if I think about this hazard analysis, indeed, before your design is finished, you sit in a room together with 20 engineers. You just also sit in the room together with the AI. So one person in the room that is not at the whiteboard has his laptop with them and just uses AI to also generate hazards. That is the first use case. The second one would be after, in an FMEA, in a design, you actually ask the AI what kind of designs are missing even a risk, or where do you see a hazard that is not yet in my hazard analysis? So to do a full check of your database, because that is where humans actually get tired quickly. If you have 400 items, 400 lines, AI can go through it much quicker. And I think these are the two main. So checking afterwards and also giving you a first initial help analysis and help you moderate the risk analysis.
Okay. So so it really helps to open up the thinking, remove the biases. Yeah, I see that. That's good. Excellent. Does anybody else have any questions? Anybody on the call? Recognize that we're getting close to the hour, so people might have other work meetings and such to attend. But yeah, Jin Wu, you have a question.
Yeah, I have a really quick question here. Would this approach also help in terms of connecting the dots between I guess risk controls and potentially requirements? How, like yes, we say, let's say there's a risk, right? But how do I know that is there a requirement that covers that risk mitigation? Is that something tangential that can be
Yeah,
done here?
that's indeed something that I actually see every day, people asking me, how can I find duplicates, basically? So if I've defined risk control items, where do I find them in my requirements? Or are they already part of a requirement? So this whole traceability is a huge thing where indeed AI can also help, because it has mostly, in most cases, you would give the AI the whole context, the whole database of your documents and so on, and that helps indeed to connect these dots.
I can add a little bit more to that. I think especially when you're in the, design and risk, they don't sit separately. They're really, you work on them in parallel and tandem, and they kind of lean into each other. What I've noticed on and working with systems engineering's team in medical device, even in other industries, is you'll kind of come in with your risk control measures early on in the project of what you think is the right mitigation, what makes most sense in the context. But what happens very quickly, and I'm sure everyone is aware, the scope of the product changes within a couple months versus 1 year, 2 years. And what happens when you're ready to do that final design phase, that handoff, is you have kind of almost risk control measures that don't really make sense in the context of the project anymore. And so really what it is kind of almost think of a way of like sending you those red flags, those signals earlier rather than later. Because again, we've seen it before, risk kind of gets pushed until the end, until it becomes an actual deliverable that needs to be attached to a phase review. And then there's a whole bunch of backward work, reverse engineering almost, to ensure that we've built the right thing. So it is, again, it's supposed to be that assistant, that neutral stakeholder that sits alongside of you through every single step of the design and development phase.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I do find that a very challenging task of any changes up at the higher level would ripple down to various level downstreams, and that becomes a very iterative and tiring process to go through during the development over the course of the development process. So it sounds like the use of AI would help, I guess, take that load off of a human being, right?
Yep, and definitely, and I don't think that issue is unique to, your team or one industry. I think again, it's like when you're working in a team where there's 100 systems engineers that sit separately from your firmware, from your electrical team, things move in silos. So to have that design documentation all funneled in one place where you're able to parse through and see what makes sense, yes, it's a huge help in those specific situations.
Thank you.
Jonas, as an auditor, what would you look for in an organization to gain the trust that they've used AI in an appropriate manner, and that the resultant work products are reliable?
So the first thing I would do, or what I like to do, is interviewing actually people. So not the risk manager or the system engineer, but just the day-to-day a day-to-day person from a different department, even if it's finance or anyone, to just see if they actually have an AI governance policy, because if you don't have that, then it gets very dangerous on every layer. Because if you don't have a real use case how to use AI and where to use AI and what is personal information, why you shouldn't put it into AI, that is also then the case when people trust AI too much. So if that happens in any department in the company, it's likely that other people will also trust AI too much. And I think that is indeed what needs to be validated in most use cases. If the trust in AI is itself, it starts if you have a risk analysis for your AI tools. So if you do that, it already shows, oh, the people think about putting something into AI before they actually use it. And this is, I think, the thing that I would check first. Indeed.
Okay, good. Yeah, I can see how we could transition from a human bias to an AI bias, and I suppose neither end of that scale is right. We need to balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was
Excellent.
actually yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. A quick question from my side. I need to drop off in a minute, but the question is that, like, how would this approach be different from someone like me, who is setting up an agent, working with a whatever natural language model that exists, training that one, saying, yes, this is my agent for risk management, this is my agent for requirement, and connecting this one, and then continuing to connect all this loop for the application that I have. Like, based on your experience and the work that you are doing, how different is the work that you're doing than someone like me working with my own agent?
I can take that. So when we have, let's say, our agent matrix mind, when it lives within the system, we've engineered it so it understands the rules of your project. And so the system has a complete back end as well, where you enforce the rules of how things are traced within your V model, for example. So how requirements are connected to product requirements, how they're connected to risk, etc. All of that is assigned in the back end so that there's clear rules of how things are connected. And so the system is trained to understand those rules, to know it within the context of your project. And again, because we've actually trained it on the medical device standard, as well as any relevant standard for whatever product you're working on, the rate of hallucination is very low, but also it understands things within the context of what you're working on. So it's able to see all the design changes, the small, let's say your junior engineer goes in tomorrow and makes a change to a test case. Let's say you go in and say, okay, something failed, and it noticed that it's failed a couple of times, but then at the fourth iteration it passed. It sees all of those changes versus kind of sitting as a blind observer of a requirements version 5 and your risk level version 17 and kind of getting a cleaner version of that at whatever stage of the project you are. You're seeing all the day-to-day works, the comments, it's happening, the conversation between the team. And again, I think everyone knows a lot of things go undocumented. When it's not documented, things go missing. And so, yeah, it keeps that almost that audit history, that trail, that design risk history that's really rich with how you ended up with the final product, the final design.
Yeah, thank you for that. And maybe another quick note is that, like, first of all, great presentation, yeah, and Jonas. So I really enjoyed that one. And the funny part is that we are doing risk management and using AI, we are introducing another risk as well, right? And when we are capturing that one, we need to ask AI, give me some of the risks that you introduced to my project.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, and you could definitely ask it, but again, that's where you kind of have your governance, your policy, your line.
Right.
Yeah, and actually,
and your training
in the testing, right? If you validate the AI, you will probably also use AI in validating stuff or test automation. So you use an automation to test AI if the prompts are working and so on. So this is indeed very fascinating. This whole thing, this loop that is never closing actually, and will never close probably.
It's kind of a vicious circle. Yeah, but part of how you train your AI, I guess. We are at time, so I think we'll stop it here. I'll stop the recording. But thank you. I want to thank you, Neha, Jonas. This was a great presentation. It really does fuel a lot of thought for each of us. We're going to try to post this recording on YouTube and on LinkedIn. I'll provide information to you, Neha and Jonas, directly. And I look forward to maybe we can work together on another presentation in the future. Thank you everybody for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at the next INCOSE Canada chapter webinar. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Neha. Thank you, Jonas. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye,
day.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.